Most of my students being tardy or having to go out in the parking lot and wrangle them in. So you guys are early and prepared and have smiles and even brought your own stuff. So it's a whole new world for me. My name is Nate Dion, and I work with the Little Traverse Conservancy, and then Amy Lipson is here as well, and she's one of our ecology specialists at Little Traverse Conservancy. And Larry Liebler is really the person to thank for pulling this together. He had reached out to say, is this something that the Conservancy would be interested? Could we do something like this? And was kind of the brainchild and spearheaded this. So thank Larry for the coffee, the donuts and snacks, but more importantly, bringing us all together, because that's what really brought this out. Like I said, I was a teacher in Gaylord for about 20 some years, mostly science and then horticulture, and then ended as a principal over in East Jordan. And this is kind of my next step in life, being able to work here. And we have a small farm in Boyne City. It's called Dion Farms, and we grow a number of different apples. And most of what we have are more, we started these as young trees and then trained them to take the shape we want, and most are on dwarf rootstocks. I understand probably a lot of us here today, and we can kind of go around, show of hands, probably have some old, sometimes abandoned trees on our property, and those are also a great way to kind of get into it. You have to go back, and it's kind of like an unruly child that maybe we've let go for a long time. We got to slowly start to train them back, but there's a lot of life, a lot of productivity, and a lot of options. So we'll talk about those today and try to give ourselves some techniques and tricks and then applications. But also, if we're looking to put new trees in, we also want to talk about and send you home with some information about how to start from the beginning, what that might look like, to train that tree just how you want it from seedling up to mature tree. My goal was to go over some techniques, kind of talk about some shaping, demonstrate some different cuts on a tree, what that could look like, talk about tools, and then more importantly, set us free. Larry and I've got a number of trees marked out, and really just give people a chance to kind of scratch our heads and make some cuts and walk around and evaluate what we did, and then come back in the end and we can have some question, answer, feedback, and hit the road. So that's our goal today. When I thought about what I was hoping to get done, it was really to give a basic roadmap on how to prune and maintain these apple trees, and then bring these guys back sometimes from what some of us think are the dead. Sometimes we think, well, there's nothing there, and the best cut I can make is going to be about 2 feet off the ground and then pull the stump. That's an easy cut to make, but before you do it, it doesn't hurt to go back and try the other thing, because you'd be amazed. I was talking to a couple people this morning. You put a little care in and you walk away, and you come back a few months later and there's live parts on that tree that you didn't even think existed. So sometimes by giving a little bit of care, we really can rejuvenate it, and a little bit of that goes a long way. So when we're thinking about pruning, that idea of why we're pruning, well, we want to reduce that overall tree size. It's a lot easier if we want to pick that fruit, if we can bring that canopy down to us a little bit. We want to make them easier to harvest, easier if you're spraying anything. A lot of us might do some sprays at different times to maximize our quality. It's a lot easier for most of our equipment that we're going to have to reach 8, 10, 12 feet in the air than 30 feet in the air. We can increase our production and our fruit quality. One of the things we want to talk about today is kind of thinning these out a little bit, because a lot of times we want some maybe bigger, better quality apples instead of having a really large crop of little dinky guys that never get a chance to size up, to sweeten up. But I think the other thing that's really important today, and I highlight it down there, is as you're thinking about this, define your why, because you can spend as much time or as little time to meet your goals. And if your goal is to bring in deer and have a nice bait pile or a nice ecology pile and have some wildlife, then your input is going to be a lot different than someone who needs these to size up, who needs them to be aesthetically nice, who needs them to be blemish free. I have to go at things a lot different. So as you're thinking about this and looking at your tree, it's really helpful to think, what do I want out of this tree? Do I just want my landscape to look a little nicer and cut out the dead? Great. That's going to be a lot easier task than shaping this tree to grow 2 bushels of really nice Honeycrisp that I've got to take to market on Saturday. So kind of keeping that in mind. I've done it myself, and you can get lost for an afternoon on an old snaggly tree. It's great therapy, but it might not be how you want to spend all your time. So kind of thinking about, as you approach a tree, what do I want to get out of this? What am I hoping to do? I think one of those big ideas is the right tools. 95% of my work are with a set of loppers just like this. That's where I really do most of the work. Shorter handles work better a lot of times because they can squeeze in and they're a lot quicker to move in things. You'll see a lot of different sizes. They've got extendable ones, which are great. Depending on how many trees you're trying to prune, what you find is sometimes shorter really works better, especially when you're trying to get into some smaller spaces. I think these are rated for 1 3/4 or 2 inch. There's not many things I can't get through with this, and these really work the best for me. The other one, I always keep one of these in my back pocket. So just that pruning saw, so when I get to something that I really shouldn't be trying to go through with this, having that pruning saw right here, that's a nice one to move to. My son, who's going on 13, is a tool guy, and he can't stand not to have a green tool for Dad under the Christmas tree. So over the last 5 years, they have added an electric chainsaw and a pole saw, and he even got me some of those snippers. And I try to use them out there. I just find a lot of times they're more cumbersome. This has been kind of nice. I had to go through and top a bunch of my trees, and as much as I try to use that pole saw, I spent a couple days down in the orchard. I probably got about 850 trees. That saw and a ladder, and I could go through and really top the trees probably the most efficient way. So I did have to give it to my son Cam. You won, buddy. That was a good purchase. I think one of the biggest pieces when we talk about maintaining tools and putting an edge on your loppers before you head out or at the end of the day does wonders. And it's kind of like, you know, shocks in a car or tires in a car. We don't realize that they're starting to wear out. And all of a sudden in a season I looked and I'm leaving raggedy cuts and it just seems like my arms are more tired. And it kind of dawned on me, well, you got to maintain things and you got to get back. And so really, you know, this is a diamond stone. It's got a coarse side. It's got a fine side. I started doing this. Takes me about a minute before I go out or a minute at the end of the day. And I'm just running that down that beveled edge and just cleaning that edge up a little bit, and it does wonders. Doesn't take much at all, but that alone I noticed I was back to nice clean cuts, and more importantly, I wasn't working as hard. So I think it was $25 on Amazon. I'll be happy to share the link, but things like this can really save. You don't need a grinding stone. All I'm doing is matching it to that bevel and just cleaning that edge up. Once or twice a year, I try to oil these up a little bit, you know, make sure that my surfaces are clean. If I'm pruning in the spring or summer, where there's a chance where I might be spreading something from one tree to the next, then at least to start the day and end the day, I'm going to disinfect a little bit. The nice thing about pruning on a day like today or in the winter, the chances of spreading any bacteria or fungus are pretty minimal because of our temperatures. And when we talk about time to prune, that's where we really identify we want to be at a time when those wounds aren't going to be opened up to bacteria and fungus and those things. Not that we can't prune in the summer, but as we maximize the chance for healthy trees, that's a key piece. So clean tools are going to be key. So clean them up once in a while, some soap, some water, you know, keeping that tree sap off this so they don't get gummed up. It's going to save your tools, and more importantly, it's going to save you time. So we talk a little about start training young. And again, you know, as a teacher, we'd come in and you try to lay down your expectations, your rules, what you'd want in September. Sometimes you'd have a new teacher, or maybe you get a substitute teacher who kind of lets things go. And in May, they decide they want to lay down the rules. That doesn't work so well. And so if we're trying to reshape some of these old trees, it's going to take some time. And I talk about the 1/3 rule. And 1/3 means when I'm going at a tree, I really don't want to remove more than 1/3 of the live foliage at any given time. 1/3 is kind of what I'd like to do. So as I'm looking at it, dead stuff's not going to count against that. If it's dead, we can easily take it out. But if I try to go in there and reshape that entire tree to the way that I ideally want to see it in one afternoon, it's probably going to be too much for that tree. And what you're going to risk is stressing that tree out. You're going to cut out a tremendous amount of bearing foliage, and it's trying to feed all those roots. And the tree is going to respond very, very vigorously. It's going to send up all kinds of new shoots and lots and lots of vegetative water spouts because it really responds, well, like you just cut its arm off. And so it responds in a way that it takes a whole lot of its energy and puts it into vegetative growth. And for most of us, we don't want vegetative growth, we want fruit. And so we have to make some of these cuts a little bit more strategically, and we're going to have to think long term. And so on some of these old trees, I'd look at more of a 2 to 3 year process. So today, I'd try to do 1/3, and then I'm going to walk away. And then I'm going to come back in the fall or next winter, and I'm going to do my next section. And then I'm going to come back again. And it's going to take a little while to get that tree to that shape that I'm happy with, but the tree is going to respond in a much more favorable way. So again, when we get back home and we're kind of looking at this, think patience, think this is a process. Today I do 1/3, and then I leave it for a while. All right?
You prune them every year?
You know, it depends on the tree. It depends on your fertilization practices. Different varieties are more vigorous than others. I try to get into my orchard less than more, and if you do it right, you can usually get every other year with a little bit of training in between. But, you know, sometimes I hear a lot of people say, well, I just like to get out there, and it's a great hobby. And that's never going to be bad, but I think we get to that point, hopefully, where we're just making a few select cuts, and really most of the work is done instead of having to go and spend the entire afternoon after we get these into shape. In terms of timing, you know, if you talk to most farmers, they'd say, you're done pruning. You're never done pruning. And most farmers are going to prune when they have time. That really comes down to it. Ideally, if we can wait until the coldest part of the winter is done, that's going to help for that, because you're exposing a wound. And you're exposing that inner tree to some really cold temperatures possibly. So in a perfect world, if you can wait till the coldest part of the winter is gone and then you can get out and do your pruning, that's great. I started in November this year. I know what my time schedule looks like. I know that I've got 3 kids and a job, and I coach basketball. So it's Saturday afternoons. It's evenings when I get a chance after work sometimes, a couple hours here, a couple hours there. I've got a couple different spots. My older trees, I don't worry as much about opening those up to cold wounds. So I worked on those in November and December because those branches are big, and even if we get a real cold snap, the chances that I'm going to get any dieback are pretty minimal. I've got another block, younger trees, and I waited to get into those until February. So ideally, we want the coldest part of the winter to be gone, but in reality, we do it when we have time, okay? I think the biggest thing we'd like to stay away from is when those trees come out of dormancy through about July. We'd like to stay out of that orchard at that point. I really don't want to be out there in the spring when I've got that new growth. I've got lots of, microorganisms in the air. I'm opening that tree up to infection. That's the time when I would not like to do that. There is something called summer pruning. A lot of commercial orchardists will be out there in late July and August because they see that as a great time to shape that young tree a little bit to get it growing just the way they want. But I think for our group today, thinking about wintertime and after the coldest part of the winter, that's kind of a great rule of thumb. But again, when we have time, any care we can give our trees, they're going to appreciate it, and you're going to see results. So I think when we're looking at a tree, sometimes right away it looks pretty daunting. So first thing I'd like to do is we just want to talk about the easy cuts. And the easy cuts are anything dead, anything decaying. There's an obvious question here. What's dead? So if you wouldn't mind, kind of gather around to a couple different trees. I'm just grabbing this limb and I'm just flexing it. And if it can flex in this manner, and I'm not hearing a brittle crack, and it's not snapping off, then I can look and I can see some, gray buds here at the end and things. That's a live limb. If I come next door, that's pretty easy to see, and I can look inside there. We're pretty brittle. That's dead. Walking around and just looking at some limbs and seeing what's alive and what's dead, and I can see the difference here. You can see that green cambium layer in there. Those are live limbs. What you don't want to do, and I've been guilty of it, is spend all kinds of time shaping a tree and realize, well, you left a lot of dead stuff up there. So identifying right away what's dead, what's live, those are great things to do first. I'm starting on some low stuff. What do we think, live or dead? That's dead right there. So in order to kind of expedite our time here, I'm going to cheat and use Cam's tools here. And when we're leaving a stub, we're leaving a point of entry for bacteria, fungi, dieback. So I'm thinking, about a 1/4 inch collar. Something like that. When we get out, guys, and we start pruning, the only thing I'd ask is at the end of the time, maybe we could be in some groups and we'll just take 2 or 3 different trees worth of brush. We'll just stack it out here for some habitat piles. That way it's kind of out of the way. So I'm looking around and I'm just finding anything dead. Those are easy ones. The other thing I'm looking for are what I call water sprouts, vegetative growth straight up and down. Most of those I'm going to take off. Now some of these old ones, Larry and I were out yesterday looking, some of these old ones, before I take all of my vegetative uprights, I might leave some because these old guys, I might need to have something become a leader later. So I'm not going to take every single water spout, but most of these upright growth, they're not going to do anything except suck nutrients and fill space. And when I'm trying to prune this, what I really want to do is I want to lower the size of the tree, I want to thin the tree out, and I want to create some windows for sunlight to come in. Water spouts are doing the exact opposite. They're taking nutrients and they're clogging this up so that sunlight can't penetrate in.
Will they ever grow fruit?
Eventually they will, sometimes. A lot of times what you'll see, and I heard someone mention, you know, they took a tree and they just hacked it right off the base, and the next year they came back and there were all kinds of little sprouts. That's that tree trying to live and just sending up all kinds of vegetative growth.
Do water spouts count towards the?
You know, kind of a box or something where we've got then 2 or 3 or sometimes 4 different, you know, limbs coming up with an open center. That's what most of these trees have ended up growing into. And that's probably what we have at home, and that's fine. If you go to a commercial orchard, most of what you're going to see is a central leader. So picture that Christmas tree shape where I've got one central leader that grows up, and then I've got some scaffolds that are extending out. They're a lot easier to maintain. It's a lot easier to, you know, kind of lower that overall height, and it's a lot easier to maintain that main structure. I've got one main beam, and then I work on my scaffolds. And then about 18 inches up, I work on some more scaffolds. So if you're starting with new trees, when you're planting your new trees, I would highly recommend to prune them into that central leader idea. Today, a lot of what we got some open centers, and that's what we're going to work on. So when I'm looking at an open center, you know, I've got over here, I've got a big old limb here, a big old limb here. This thing, what do we think? Any reason to keep this? No. This is dead, so we're going to take that right off. So in my mind, what I'm trying to do is just select a few, because what I don't want to do is spend a whole lot of time thinning out and shaping this, and then I come back and decide, I'm going to take this out anyways, and I just spent all this time thinning it out. So trying to kind of define what I want to be my main 3 scaffolds, if you will, and I think I use that term on there, scaffolds of my open center, identifying those, getting rid of some of the other ones, and then we'll come back and we'll fine tune those individual ones. Well, we'll get rid of this guy. Oh, Cam sent me with a bad battery. Yeah, I'll come back and get him.
I just cut it.
What's that?
I'm gonna cut it
Yeah,
right
that'd be
off.
great. He's gonna laugh. So we're gonna take that out of there, and I'll come back and get that guy. I'm getting this guy. I'm getting that guy out of there. And at some point, I'm either gonna have to probably get up in my ladder, or I'm gonna have to get my pole saw up there. So I'm looking. I really like this, so I'm gonna keep him. I like this one. I think I got some live growth up there, so I want to keep that one. But I know that I need to get rid of this one right here. So we're going to get rid of that one. Those are dead. I can see the bark on them, and they're clogging up my bottom. I also kind of want to think, another thing thinking about, what's it going to look like to maintain underneath these? A lot of these are in our yards, so are we trying to mow? Are they getting in the way underneath? You know, things like this. Is that something that we need to get out of the way so we can get underneath with the mower or not? And that's specific to a grower. So I'm also thinking about up here, you know, I got some crossing branches right here. Remember, I want to open this up, so I want some sunlight to come through. So before we have to get on the ladder, we're going to go to our next friend right here. Excuse me. Brought the coffee, brought the donuts, and I hit him with a saw. It's going to go on my evaluation, I think.
So right now it doesn't matter if these are you're trimming for deer apples or human consumption. You're just getting rid of the dead
Either way, I'm getting rid of the dead. You
and
got it.
the suckers.
Yep, yep. So up here, I can clearly see that's dead. Got over here, that's dead right there. Now, yeah, see, I got some live up there. I was, but when I look at this, that kind of balances that left side a little bit. I don't have much else if I take this whole thing. So I think at this point, we're going to take that dead. What we're really going to do is free up that guy to be one. And I think we can leave one of these, probably not both. I'll take one of these out. I want to balance that tree a little bit as well. I want to have one nice limb on one side, another nice limb over here, and a third one here. That's kind of my goal.
On the back of this one, there's a whole lot of black on the bark. Is that the bead?
Yeah, and I think this, when I feel this,
Yeah.
there is some live out here. It's shaded, so probably selecting one of those would be a great idea. And like you pointed out, since this one's already demonstrating disease, let's take one of these. So we're going to end up leaving probably this and that. So as we're going through, we're thinking dead and decayed, those are easy cuts. And then we're thinking, do we have two that are immediately above each other and they're growing in the same direction? Those are going to be some easy cuts in our mind. Dead and decayed first, and then crossing branches or ones that shade each other out. And then you look, something like that, that just opened up a whole lot. And that's going to help as we start to think about light getting in here. Ideally, I'd kind of like to bring the overall height of this tree down a bit. So after I take out one of these, the next thing I'm going to do is lower that height down a little bit. And I think I might take that top part, and that just takes my height of that tree down to about right there. So we're bringing that height down. Whenever we're pruning back to another branch or a node. So every time we have a point at which a branch comes out, that's called a node. And that's a node. And that's a node. We always trim back to a node. In other words, I would never just make a cut right in the middle of it and leave that stump there. Those are good rules of thumb. So when we're trying to select where to cut and what to cut, we prune back to a node. So, if I'm thinking about lowering the overall height of this tree, this is my node, if you will, right there. This is called a lateral branch. Whenever I lower the height, I trim back to my next lateral branch. So this is going to be the height of this tree right here, and I'm going to take out that guy right there. And that's going to take all that stuff right out of there. Now, for the essence of time, I'll come back and do that when we kind of break up and people go to their trees. I'm going to take out this one as well. That's going to be another one that I'm going to take out. I kind of want a uniform height all the way around. So if this is my established height, then I'm going to go over here and do the same thing on that side.
How about the weeping one? Are you just gonna let them go?
Say again?
The weeping one, just let them go. One there.
Come and show me. Which ones are we looking at?
I'm looking at, see behind you, all those that are almost on the ground. You just let those go?
Well, it depends on what my management height needs to be. If I need to get underneath here, I'm going to prune some of these up.
I know you said this, so that's what you do. Just let them go if they are bothering you.
If they're not bothering me,
And if they're too low and you don't like them, even though they're alive, you just take them.
I just take them. Yep. Yep. The other thing I'm looking to do is I want to thin this out a little bit. That's dead right there. So when we talked about dead stuff, we've talked about changing the height of our tree. We've talked about selecting branches where we might have two that are in the same location and one is shading the other. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4 different branches coming out of here. When I think about wanting to have better quality but fewer apples, this is a way to lower that overall production. So I'm going to take some of these out. Every other one right there. Those are called thinning cuts. So when I'm working across that branch, I'm looking at my growth or my spurs, and I'm just selecting. And I'm trying to thin those out so that they don't have as many buds, so they can't get as many apples, so there's not as many competition. If my goal is to have better quality, larger fruit that's a little bit sweeter, then I need to decrease the overall crop load. So height is going to be something that we're going to control. We also want to look at our width. We sometimes might want to bring that in a little bit. So if this is extending beyond where we kind of want to be in terms of, gosh, this is getting too far out, it's crowding another tree, or it's getting too close to the house, I'm going to take it back to there. Why am I taking it back to here? It's a mode, yeah. It's another branch. That feels
trying
pretty.
to keep the tree 2 to 3 times your height.
Am I trying to keep the tree 2 to 3 times the height?
Your height, like how tall?
You know,
Is
these
that
are old standards. So I'm trying to get this to probably 12 to 15 is where I'd like to be. Naturally, it's going to start to creep up there in the next few years. Trees can be put on different root stocks. So a commercial tree that you buy in the nursery these days is actually a combination of 2 different organisms, 2 different trees. The bottom of that tree is called a root stock, and that's the part that's going to grow that root system. And then a nursery has budded a scion on top of that, and that's the variety. So that's your pippin, or that's your mutsu, or your gala, or your honeycrisp. The rootstock controls the size of that tree to some degree. So we have 3 different classes of rootstocks, if you will. There's what we call natural seedlings, which are going to allow that tree to grow kind of to its natural height. That's going to be that 25 to 35 foot tall. There's a dwarfing rootstock series. That's going to take that tree down to about 40 to 60% of its normal height. So now we're thinking maybe 12 to 18 feet tall. And then there's a class of rootstocks called dwarfing rootstocks, and those are going to keep that tree really, really small, really condensed. So that's what most commercial orchards have gone to, because we can fit more trees per acre, and it's a lot easier to maintain and harvest and spray trees that are 8 feet tall or 10 feet tall than 20. So what we see out in the wild like this, these are all probably, a lot of natural seedlings. If given their own volition, they'd probably get to that 35-foot height. But for us, that's a little bit big. So I'd like to bring this down, somewhere in that 18 to 20 is my goal. Did that answer your question at all? All right, so we talked a little bit about some of those thinning cuts, and as I'm talking, I'm just going to be making some cuts here. There's a lot of live here. I got something shading it right above. I'm going to thin this out, but overall I want to leave something here. So we did a couple things. We reduced some bearing surface for fruit, and we opened up some nice windows here. I'm going to take one right there, so I'm going to leave something here, but I'm going to get rid of that right there. Looking at this, that looks pretty dead to me. There's a little there. I think I'll probably take that somewhere right in there, because that's going to free up a whole lot of space. So we're starting to define those scaffolds a little bit. We're going to go up, climb up top, and reduce our height. I just want to pop back to my outline here and see where we are, guys. We talked about not leaving a stub.
That's pretty cool.
We're not going to worry about dressing any of these wounds either. That tree naturally will secrete that covering. It'll grow new skin just like we will. What we don't want to do is come through and paint it with something that's going to lock in fungi or bacteria. So as much as we sometimes want to go through and paint all our wounds, avoid that temptation, let nature do its thing.
Can I ask you something? So
Yes.
if you had, it was a big fruit year last year, and my tree got really heavy.
Yep.
And I had major limbs just break off because they were so overloaded. And for an example, if you have a large branch like this and it breaks off, it'll rip all the way down to here. At that point, how would you address that situation? Would you take off that entire? Would you?
If there's still something up here that I like,
Yeah.
then I'm going to leave it up there.
You will still leave
Yep.
it. Okay.
But you bring up a good point, and that's one of those pieces that we talk about in here. When we're establishing early on, we're establishing that structure. One of the things that we have the availability and option to do is to pick branches with good crotch angles. And a good crotch angle is going to be somewhere between 45 and 60 degree from that leader. If you have them really, really acute like that, really sharp, it can't hold that large quantity of fruit that you're talking about. And so when it gets to a certain tipping point, the whole thing just breaks off. If we've got trees that have a nice crotch angle, this is pretty good right here. As this becomes laden with fruit, it'll bend before it'll break. If that crotch angle is real tight, it's just going to break right off once we get too much fruit. So that's going to be another thing as I'm walking around and looking. If I'm looking at a branch and there's kind of question marks, should I take it? Should I leave it? If it's got a really narrow crotch angle, it might be a good one to get rid of. You can change those crotch angles when they're young. And so when we buy that brand new tree from the nursery, when we've got that tree, and we stick it in the ground and we've got it planted, and we're selecting which limbs we're going to leave that first year, those limbs, when they're really young, they're very flexible and malleable. And so I can actually take a toothpick or a clothespin, and I can clothespin right to my, I'm going to call this my central leader. This is the main axis of the tree. I can clothespin right here, and I put that pin just down here a little bit, and it just flattens that limb down. I'm going to leave it there for about 4 to 6 weeks. I'm going to come back in June, July. That limb now has a trajectory that's growing out and not up, and I can take that clothespin off of there. So when we're establishing those new trees, now we got that chance to shape that tree just how we want it. So a little bit of time and thought into which scaffolds I want. Remember scaffolds? Scaffolds are going to be my main branches that extend off of my central leader, where they are and what those crotch angles, that's going to pay a lot of dividends 5-10 years down the road. The other thing, when limbs are flat, they'll grow fruit. When limbs are growing straight up and down or have real narrow crotch angles, they become more vegetative. And that means they just suck nutrients, they're nitrogen hounds, and they grow straight up and they make a bunch of leaves. If we want fruit earlier, we want to bend those limbs down, because that induces a change in the physiology of the tree, and it causes it to make fruit buds versus vegetative buds.